on the top of Daf Yud Beis on the base, the Ein Misachachim. It means that we're dealing with a lechatchila situation. The Mishnah is telling you lechatchila, this is not something that you want to do. You don't want to use these chavile konim and zradim and eitzim and chash as your schach. And why? Mishum gzeras otzar. There's only a gzera here for a case in which you might put it up l'shem yibush. But oraisa shapidam. But obviously, these cases of chavilos on a deraisa level are certainly kosher. So therefore, Rabbi Yochanan was forced by process of diuk from the Mishnah to interpret that we're dealing with what? With a psul dirabanan. And that psul applies in the case where we put up the chavilos for the sake of schach, for the sake of tseah. Pasam. Now let's compare our Mishnah to the Mishnah later on of Chotet v'Gadish. The Katani ain't a sukkah. It doesn't say ain. This is not something that you should do, avoid it. It says ain't a sukkah, meaning afilu b'di'evet. D'v'daraisa nami ain't a sukkah. So again, just to summarize, our Mishnah here on Daf Yud Beis is talking about a case of a psul d'Rabbanan, meaning he put it up l'shem sale. We're afraid of a case where he might confuse it and put it up l'shem yibush and then change his mind and he won't bother putting it up and down again. The Mishnah later on at Daf Tesvav is addressing a case of psul d'oraisa, and that's why it says ain't a sukkah. It's not a sukkah at all, even if the evidence is invalid. And that's talking about a case where he dug it out and he did not shake it on top, and that's possibly then what? Tasev alomina asu.
He learns that from
right. Ein mesachachim means lechatchila, but ein a sukkah means it's worthless. Okay, now we move on to a discussion about something which you and I might think is makabel tuma, and therefore it cannot be used as schach, even though it's gidulim in haaretz. And these are called chitzim. Now, chitzim are kind of like arrows, and these are wood, so they grow from the ground. And now the question is whether he can put it up on his sukkah as schach. Rav Yehuda Marav. There are two categories of chitzim. One is called male, and the other is called female. What does that mean? Sichacha b'chitim zcharim kshera v'nikevos psula. Now, these arrows, which are attached to arrowheads, fit into two categories. You can describe them in two ways. In the case of zecharim, what happens is the chetz has no receptacle. And here we have to know something about Kabbalah's tumah. For a kli'etz, for a wooden keli to be makabel tumah, to be susceptible to tumah, it has to have what's called a base kibul. It has to be with a receptacle, like a bowl, a plate, and so forth and so on. The opposite, the flip side of a kli kibul, is called pshute kli'etz. We have to decide whether this chetz, which you attach to an arrowhead, does it have a kli kibul? If it's a zachar, it doesn't have a kli kibul. It has no receptacle. Let me start the other way around, the easier case. The easier case is nekevos psula. Why is nekevos psula? The nekeva is an arrow, meaning it's a piece of wood, a round piece of wood, and you hollow it out. Once you hollow it out, then you attach an arrowhead, and the arrowhead has a piece of metal that goes into the hollow place, and therefore the nekeva has a receptacle. It qualifies as a kli kibul, and therefore it's makabel tumah, and therefore ipso facto it's possible schach. But the zachar has no kli kibul, because at the end of the piece of wood you have protrusion which goes into a hollow of the arrowhead, And therefore, it's interesting how the Gemara uses this imagery. But anyway, you see, the Gemara didn't flinch, But this is the way that the Gemara clarified it. So, and possibly that's how they called it by name. They had different types of chitzim. Some they called the kaven, some they operated with two different mechanisms. In the case of the Zachar, we have a kliates, pshute kliates. There's no receptacle. And therefore it's not makabel tumah. It also grows from the ground. And there it's kosher l'skak pshito.
Arrows, it's without the arrowhead.
Correct. If you add the arrowhead, it's possible because the arrowhead is made of metal. We're talking about the arrow without the head of the arrow. We don't put metal on top of Sukkah because metal is not gedulei karka and metal is makabel tumah. It's possible for two reasons.
Because metal is gedulei karka.
Right, but it doesn't eat.
It's like the water.
Yeah, it doesn't eat from the ground. If not for the statement of Rabbi Yehuda Marav, I would have thought Zecharim Otunikevis, we should make a Gzeira Nigzar. That we're afraid that if we allow him to use these kind of wooden protrusions, which are Zecharim, that tomorrow he's going to mess up and he'll use even the Kavos, and then he's got apostle of Sukkah. Gemara says, but the Kavos Sula Pshita, why did Rav have to bother telling me that if it's an Akeva, it's psula? This is a classic case of a kliates, which has a receptacle, it's got a base kibul, it's makabel tumah, then for sure it's possible. Malditem, I might have thought. Base kibul osila malos, lo shmei kibul kamash balon. Now Rashi adds an important word here. I'll read the Gemara again with the addition of Rashi. Again, Rashi's not changing the text, but Base kibul osin l'malos li'olam, Rashi says. What does it mean li'olam? That it's connected to the arrowhead on a permanent basis. Sometimes, in the process of manufacturing, we may make them separately, but once we attach them, then people don't take apart the arrowheads from the arrow, and therefore, since it's kavua, therefore it's considered like there's no base kibul. And it would not be makabel tumah. Why? Because a base kibul means that I pour something into the receptacle, then I pour it out, and so forth and so on, all using it on a temporary basis. Here, it's permanently affixed to the arrowhead, and that's not called a base kibul. Kamashma, no, it is makabel tumah. It's therefore invalid for schach, because since it was manufactured in a certain way, and theoretically you could use it in that way, as a base kibul, it's being used as a base kibul, even though it's asur lamalos, nevertheless, it's considered a base kibul. And now we go on to a sugya that deals with what's called pishtan. Pishtan in English is flax. And here in the Masechet, he has a long list of the different stages in the processing of flax. Aleph. The first stage is called shriya. Shriya means that we take the givolim of pishtan that are natural and we soak them in water in order to soften them. This is all for the purpose of making threads out of the flax. Number two, miyabchinosam, we dry them. Number three, kochimosam, we crush them. And in order to remove the klipos, which is the givol that surrounds the flax itself, we remove all of that stuff, all of those klipos, right? In Kabbalistic terms, we got to get rid of the klipos, right? And number four, sarkin es hasivin b'masrek. Now we do something called combing. And the combing process will remove those parts of the klipos that get stuck in the fibers of the flax. And number five, milabdin osam b'tanur, then we whiten them. After that, we have what's ready to be woven as chute tvir, as flax threads. Now, since the process of preparing the flax for threading, to make a thread out of it, is so multi-tiered, we want to know at what point is it makabel tumah. Generally speaking, something that's a finished product is a kli and it's makabel tumah. But if you haven't finished the manufacturing process and it's not functional, it's not yet a kli. This is very relevant to the laws of muktzah. Because a kli is not muktzah, but if it's not yet complete, It's muktzah. Amar Rabba bar Chanan, now it's relevant to schach. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, the name of Rabbi Yochanan. What is the status of pishtan, of flax, as far as schach is concerned? And when we asked Rabbi Yochanan this question, he broke it down into three different subcategories. Flax could be defined under three different categories. The first category is called anitze pishtan. Anitze pishtan means that all of the five processes that we mentioned earlier have already been implemented. All we're lacking is what's called tviyah. Tviyah means the actual weaving. But we have what will be threads of flax. And therefore, Succah, ba'anitze pishtan psula, it's already makabel tumah. It's undergone all the five different parts and segments of the process. It's possible schach. On the other extreme, is also pashut, called hotznei pishtan. Hotznei pishtan means natural give ole pishtan. Immediately after you take it out of the ground, you haven't even started the process yet. You haven't even done shriya. You haven't even begun soaking it, and certainly not drying it and combing it. Shera, that's not makabel tumah. It's not a kli. But if you ask me about a middle case, which we're not sure exactly, the Gemara is going to try to understand this middle case, which is called the Hushnei Pishton Eini Yodea Mahu. I have to concede, I do not know what is the status of Hushnei Pishton. So now Rabbah, who is quoting Rabbi Yochanan, adds the following: Hushnei Atzmon Eini Yodea. Rabbi Yochanan doesn't know the status of Hushnei. I don't know what Hushnei are. I don't even know how to describe them. And he vacillates back and forth. If we're talking about a case of doyek, doyek means they were ground. Let's just see. I'm just curious how he translates it in English, the word doyek. The Masechet says doyek means to grind. What? Beaten. Beaten. Okay, fine. Excellent. Beaten is even better than grind, but it means the same thing. So it doesn't mean doyek. He beats it down. Velo nofitz. But he didn't get to the point in which it's completely crushed. Vadayin lo sorak b'masrei. Hushni korila. Right, so even though he already got to the state of dayek, which means he ground them. What did you call it? He beaten them. Okay, velo nofitz. Nofitz means to comb, so they haven't been combed yet. Nevertheless, hushni karile. Rabbi Yochanan still vacillates as to the status of uncombed flax. Avol tare below doik hutzne karili. Remember that hutzne was kshera, and what he's saying here is that even though he has passed the process. Just 1 second. Can you give me a second? I'm sorry. Below nofit. Right? Velo nofitz. Avol tari velo doyik. Hutzne kari. However, if it's only at the stage in which, this is the first of 5 stages, in which he soaks them in water, and he hasn't yet crushed them at all, which is the second stage, then that was pshita, that was hutzne. Hutzne, we said for sure, is kosher. It's too unprocessed, because although he started the process with soaking them, but he hasn't yet gotten to the process of diet, of beating them. So that means that Rabbi Yochanan's Safek was after he beats them, before he combs them, Odilma perhaps, Tari, Velodiek, Nami Hushne Karile. If he's past the first stage of the process and he's already soaked these kernels, even if he hasn't yet ground them in what's called in Hebrew machteshes, which is a grinding machine, Rabbi Yochanan calls it Hushni, and Hushni is a suffix. We don't know whether it's makabel. So basically, just to summarize, Rabbah says that before you introduce Rabbi Yochanan's suffix about Hushne, I want to introduce my own suffix. I don't know what Rabbi Yochanan had in mind by Hushne. Was Hushne a description of something that has already passed the process of soaking, but it has not been crushed yet, or it's beyond crushing, it hasn't been combed? Rabbi Yehuda, Hai Shushe Ushvatre. I see we ran out of time. So let's make a note of where we got up to. Rabbi Yehuda, it's 2.5 lines before the end of Yud Beis Amid Bey. Okay then, so I'll wish you all a great day.